is a sensory and an emotional experience that is a creation of your brain based off of the real or perceived tissue threat. So if you think
Welcome back to Let's Talk Wellness Now. I'm your host, Dr. Deb, and today I'm talking with Rafi Salazar, and we're going to talk about chronic pain and the importance in relationships between healthcare providers and patients. So Rafi is the principal owner of Rehab U Practice Solutions, a leader in patient retention strategy. He has experience in a variety of rehab settings, working with patients recovering from various injuries and surgeries. He works as a lead clinician in the outpatient clinic at his local VA medical center, where he works on projects to improve patient and employee engagement and experience throughout the organization. Rafi led a team to roll out patient engagement initiative rooted in relationship-based care. After leaving the VA, Rafi began working as a healthcare consultant on a multi-million-dollar project for Georgia's Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. This project involved work related to the transition of individuals out of state institutes to community residents and establishing statewide mobile integrated clinical services for individuals on the state Medicaid waiver program. Rehab U Practice Solutions helps clinics, health systems, and healthcare companies improve patient engagement and experience, leading to increased revenue and lifetime patient value. He envisions a world where skilled, competent, and caring clinicians serve and care for engaged patients to promote better clinical outcomes, unmatched patient satisfaction, and lasting relationships. You know, I'm just going to say here, this is such a wonderful mission statement, because in today's day where it seems like everyone cares only about money and not about people, this is such an amazing vision. And I don't think this country has always been in this mindset. I really do think healthcare, people in general, we're always out to help one another. And somewhere along the trajectory, things changed. And I'm not exactly sure where that was that it changed, but we became very money hungry and driven by money and things. And it's very difficult to move away from that mindset because we've been raised with that for so many years. So hearing Rafi talk about how he wants to engage patients and promote good clinical outcomes so patients don't keep spending their money and not getting any benefit out of what they're doing, and he wants to see patient satisfaction, this could completely redefine healthcare as we know it. And I really think this is where healthcare needs to go, and where we need to take a stand on healthcare is looking at actual patient outcomes and cost-benefit ratios, where everybody wins in the benefit of healthcare. So with that, I'm going to bring on my guest, Rafi, and we are going to chat about how he's looking at doing this. So welcome back to Let's Talk Wellness Now. I'm your host, Dr. Deb, and I'm with Rafi Salazar today, and we are going to talk about chronic pain and things that you can do to help with chronic pain, as well as how to establish and execute your relationship between healthcare providers and patients. So Rafi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm an occupational therapist by trade, and I guess my work in chronic pain and the like started back when I graduated. I went and worked with the Department of Veterans Affairs and saw a lot of veterans that were experiencing chronic pain. And the time I was there was that whole 2012 through 15, 16 time frame where the VA for a long time had been promoting, basically because they had too many patients and not enough clinicians, they were doing a lot of opioid treatment for pain. And then that whole 2012 and on is kind of when the FDA said, no, this opioid epidemic is what it's being called now, is out of control. We need to start cutting people back. And they began, some of the stories were pretty horrendous. There were people that had been receiving fentanyl patches and things like that for 15, 20 years. And they went into their PCP's office and they were basically told, we have to cut you off. So these patients had, at that point, built up a dependency on these medications to manage their pain, their chronic pain, and then we're being basically cut cold turkey. So
yeah, no weaning process or anything with that. How terrible.
It was pretty rough. Sometimes there was some step down, but a lot of it was the physicians themselves were scared about prescribing opioids because they began being monitored and watched and all of that. So in an effort to keep veterans from being just dropped, right? The VA really invested a lot of time and energy and research into non-pharmaceutical methods for managing chronic pain, and I was able to work with the team to develop, we called it an integrated or multidisciplinary approach to pain management, and that's kind of where my work with pain got started. And through that work at the VA, was able to help a lot of veterans that were experiencing pain for decades get back to living their life as best they could. We always told people, chronic pain is chronic because it's there for a while, but it doesn't have to limit you or keep you from doing the things you want to do. The goal is to be able to really facilitate the patient or the client to do the things they need to do while managing whatever aches and pains result from their work, right, or from their activity or participation in daily life. So we did a lot of work with mindfulness and dealing with neuroplastic pain or pain that originates from the nervous system as opposed to like a tissue damage or something like that. And it was really, really meaningful work. And then I ended up leaving to go do some consulting with the Department of Behavioral Health here in Georgia and did some work on, it was statewide integrated mobile clinical support, and then wanted to get back into treating patients again, did a small stint teaching at the university, and then wanted to get back to doing hands-on patient treatment again and got into what we do now, which is proactive rehabilitation and wellness, where a multidisciplinary outpatient rehab clinic, so physical therapists and occupational therapists, really focusing on folks that have persistent or chronic musculoskeletal pain. So we treat a lot of folks that have been in pain for years at the clinic.
That's awesome. I love that you guys took what could be a really horrific situation, and unfortunately is, because the world right now that we're living in, we have a lot of people addicted to these medications and just being cut off. But you created a program for them that could turn things around and make it easier for them, so they didn't end up on the street looking for Oxycontin or heroin or some of the other medications that they can get on the street that act like they're prescription drugs, but are going to keep them in a worse situation. So thank you for doing that. That was amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of meaningful work for sure. It's one of those things that gets you excited when you wake up in the morning.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit about what that program entailed? Like, what did you guys put together for people?
Sure. So the program entailed, it was multidisciplinary, meaning that it wasn't just like you didn't just go to the PT office or the OT office. It was usually managed at a team level, really. So we had a physician involved, we had PT, OT, we had neuropsychology involved, and some psychiatry. And we ended up looking at some of those. We really focused on the non-physical factors for pain. So we took what's called a BioPsychosocial Approach, which is the traditional medical model has been biomedical, which basically says that you have pain because there's a physical problem with you or a biological problem. Maybe it's a tissue that's too tight, or maybe you've got a muscle that's out of balance, or maybe it's a postural thing, or maybe there's actual damage to your tissue that needs to be healed. And when that is taken care of, when that physical problem is taken care of, your pain goes away. And what we know from the research is that is, especially in the realm of chronic and persistent pain, that's not always the case. So there are other factors. That's where the biopsychosocial approach comes in. So there is a biological, and sometimes that really does need to be addressed. But for most folks that have been experiencing pain for a very, very long time, just fixing the muscles and the tissues and the joints doesn't necessarily take away the pain. So we really focused on those ancillary factors. So mental health was a big one, stress, anxiety, especially at the VA, you're dealing with folks that might have had a comorbidity of like PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, which was impacting their pain. In fact, it's pretty interesting, the research about that. There are folks that may have chronic musculoskeletal pain, let's say shoulder or back pain or something like that, and they will have a PTSD flashback or a reliving of that traumatic experience. And when rated on subjective pain measures the next day, their pain will be through the roof. And if you look at it, like, there's nothing biologically changed with this patient. They didn't pull a muscle, they didn't fall and hurt themselves, but their lived experience of pain is much more profound now, and they really have almost an increased perception of their pain level, and that is entirely due to their those psychosocial factors that are affecting their lived pain experience. So when we got together and began putting this program in place, it was all about building in what we called safe movement or safe participation in life, not safe from like keeping you safe from gunshots or anything like that, but if you think about what pain is, according to the International Association for the Study of pain is an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience that's associated with either real or perceived tissue threat or tissue damage. So if you break that down, it really just means that pain is a creation of your brain and your central nervous system when your brain thinks that you're in danger. So what we focused on was kind of educating patients and saying, listen, you're experiencing this pain because over the last 10, 15, 20 years, your brain has really felt threatened. And when your brain feels threatened and it feels like you're going to damage yourself more, it's going to create the sensation of pain to keep you from hurting yourself. That's its whole job. So what we want to do is begin building in a structure that allows you to move and to do the things you want to do again, while retraining your central nervous system, your brain, all your nerves, all of that kind of thing, that this movement is safe and it is okay. And then once you can build that in, you can begin expanding it. So, okay, maybe it hurt to lift your arm up to your shoulder, but now we've retrained it and you can lift your arm up to your shoulder without pain. Well, now it's time to make that a functional activity. Maybe you want to throw the baseball in the backyard with your grandkid or something like that without pain. Well, let's build that into a structure that you can do that in a way that retrains your nervous system, that it is a safe and normal movement and that there is no threat or actual damage happening to your tissue. So a lot of it was very much stemmed in that idea of neuroscience, that what we're trying to do is retrain the nervous system, that this movement is okay and it is safe and it is not associated with any kind of threat.
I love that, because I think you're so onto things. Like when you're afraid something's going to hurt, over time you just don't do it anymore, right? Like exactly. I can't get on the floor and play with my kids because it's going to be too uncomfortable to get up, or I'm not going to be able to get up and people are going to see that I'm struggling to get up and that's going to be embarrassing to me. How does, like, this is such an interesting topic for me, because some people have very little actual physical diagnostic pain that we can measure, but yet mentally they feel like they are in so much pain that they can barely move. How does that affect us, whether it was a post-traumatic stress or maybe it was just the pain themselves and they have a very low pain tolerance? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So we see this all the time in the clinic. Folks that come in and they say, my back is killing me, and I've seen 3 doctors, I've had an x-ray, I've had an MRI, and everything looks normal. So I shouldn't be feeling pain, right? And we always try to tell them, like, if you think about going back to that definition of pain, that pain is a sensory and an emotional experience that is a creation of your brain based off of the real or perceived tissue threat. So if you think about your whole brain's job from like a biological standpoint, from an evolutionary standpoint, is to keep you, the organism, alive and in the gene pool. So it's got a vested interest in making sure that you don't damage yourself. So the way it normally works, like a typical pain response, like if you touch a hot stove or something like that, and the burner really does damage your skin, it burns those tissues and causes injury. The heat from that stove stimulates those nerves. It sends that signal up to your brain. Your brain says, "Oh my gosh, this is causing pain. This is causing damage. We need to get your hand out of this situation." So your hand feels pain and you jerk your hand away. So you get that feeling of pain, and that's a normal protective mechanism. There was a real threat. It was causing tissue damage. Your brain took that sensory input from the stove and said, "Wow, this is causing damage. We need to get this guy to get his hand off the burner." You felt the pain. You jerked your hand away. That's the way it's supposed to work. And then what happens is after that time, you don't have any more pain in your hand, right? Like once you remove your hand from the stove, it doesn't hurt anymore. However, sometimes, and especially in instances of chronic or persistent pain, your brain kind of gets that wrong, right? So your brain's always getting this input. It's always kind of making these judgment calls. Sometimes it's okay, and sometimes it's right on. Like this is causing pain. This is causing damage. We're going to create pain so you don't further injure yourself. Sometimes it gets it wrong, though, right? And a great example of this happens to be, I'm trying to think, this is a pretty common story or an example, a case study that happened, I think, in Australia in the pain science realm. So someone was working in construction, they fell off a step, and they landed on a nail, and the nail was sticking right out the top of their boot. And this person was in agonizing pain. Couldn't step on their foot, couldn't bear any weight. It was a very, very big deal. They got this guy, loaded him up, took him to the ER. They decided that because of the nail sticking through his boot, they couldn't just rip his shoe off. So they were going to have to cut this boot off and they kind of remove the nail and do the sutures and all that. So they walked him through this plan.
Yeah.
And the patient the whole time is writhing in pain. So the doctor gets there and they take their forceps or their scissors and they cut the boot. And what they see is that this nail was actually right in between the guy's toes. It hadn't punctured any skin.
Oh my gosh.
Anything, right?
Yes.
But because the man looked down and saw this nail in his boot, and the only logical explanation was that it went through something and it's going to cause a lot of pain. So this person's brain had really created this great sensation of pain to protect this individual. It just got it wrong, right? And the same thing happens with anybody. Whether you tweak your back, lifting a box, or bending down to play with the grandkids, over time, your brain and your sensory system just gets those calls wrong. And what happens is over a series of getting those, misinterpreting the sensory input over time, that is a learned pain behavior so that the person knows, oh man, every time I get down on the floor, it hurts my back to get back up. And it's not that it's, I always tell people, it's not in your head, but it is a creation of your brain. So the pain you are feeling is absolutely real. The pain that these patients feel, regardless of whether the x-ray shows something or the MRI doesn't, the pain, the lived experience of pain is absolutely real. What we need to do is just retrain that sensory system that this isn't dangerous, right? And when that happens, then you can begin moving again pain-free. But it's a little, the brain is incredibly complex, and it's interesting to say the least, especially when it comes to pain.
Absolutely. I mean, and certain neurotransmitters trigger certain things. Exactly. And so if you're deficient in those neurotransmitters, your pain level's going to be higher and everything's going to be crazy. I just have to say this. Had we had this approach prior to doling out opioids over the years, we would not have created a pandemic of opioid use and abuse. And can you imagine the number of people that wouldn't have had to suffer all these decades being on pain meds because somebody actually told them how their body was perceiving pain and taught them how to change that perception of pain?
Oh yeah, and it is unfortunate. You've got, I don't fault any of the doctors or anything like that. They were just doing what they knew to do at the time. But the reality is, especially now, is that our just knowledge of pain and how it works and the complexity of it has grown. There are definitely a lot of practitioners now that are taking this approach with patients and trying to sit them down and saying, like, listen, there's a better way to deal with your pain than thinking that something's wrong. And I think that the greater issue for me isn't even that these patients are just getting these medications, it's that they're losing hope. They're not being given hope by the medical system. They're being told you're always going to feel this pain, and we're just going to give you this pill, or you're going to have to deal with it XYZ way, whatever that may be. And the reality is that for many, many patients out there that have been experiencing pain for years, decades even, recovery is possible and self-management is possible, and that's the goal for everybody. And I tell patients that your brain is changing from the day you're born until the day you die. So it doesn't mean that your pain will be gone forever, but we can definitely make some inroads to make life a little bit more pleasant in the time that you're here, right?
Absolutely. And I don't blame doctors either, because those are the tools we had. I blame the medical system, because insurance never wanted to pay for this type of process or therapy. They don't want to pay for a lot of things that truly help. And so they'll pay for a medication, but might not pay for a therapy. And if patients are already in pain and they're already not working, their funds are already limited. And if insurance doesn't cover something, many of them don't have the funds to access it, or these programs don't exist in a lot of places for them to access it. And nobody teaches the doctors in the clinic that these kinds of things actually exist, because there's not that big pharma behind it. So nobody goes to their clinics and talks to them about it unless they learn it at a conference or something. We're in the dark as much as the patient is in the dark.
Yeah, a lot of times that's the case. And then you have to look at the kind of the incentive structures behind it. You kind of hit it a little bit ago. I'm not one of those like big conspiracy theorists that talk about, big pharma's, getting in cahoots to try to keep people hooked. I think it's just, it's incentives, right? It's normal human behavior. And the pharmaceutical companies do make money. They're in the business of making money, and they're incentivized to get people prescribed their medication. So they have a vested interest in making sure that every doctor in the country gets their pamphlet or gets their CEU course or gets their paid lunch, whatever it happens to be. And it is unfortunate.
Yes.
It's the situation we find ourselves in, right?
Absolutely. I blame the insurance companies, actually, because they don't want to pay for anything. But yet, if they paid for this, they could save a ton of money on the back end of decades of medications and disability and people's lives being distressed and multiple medications, and then obesity because they can't move. I mean, we could go on and on and on about all the things that happen when someone's in pain and they compensate. And that's more expensive to the insurance company than the insurance company picking up the tab for a program like what you've created. That's where the problem lies.
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. And I think part of it is for the longest time, healthcare and third-party payers in particular have kind of viewed healthcare service delivery as almost industrialized, right? It's a number of units. Clinicians are getting paid for the codes they bill or the amount of time they spend with the patient, which incentivizes it skews the incentives across healthcare. It means that as a clinician, I'm not incentivized if I'm getting paid by an insurance company. I'm not incentivized to do what is best for the patient in a lot of ways. If I know that there's an effective treatment that takes 1 unit of treatment versus bringing them in and doing what we normally do and getting paid 4 units, it skews the incentive. So some of the change that we're seeing in healthcare now towards more of a value-based reimbursement system or a merit-based reimbursement program, I do think is going to help with that in a lot of ways, because even the insurance companies now are starting to see we can pay somebody up front a little bit and then save a lot on the back end. And I think it's just a matter of time for all of the stakeholders involved, because whenever we talk about healthcare, we like to think about it as a two-person arrangement. It's the clinician and it's the patient, but really there's 4 stakeholders involved. You've got the patients, you've got the providers, but then you've got the payers, the insurance companies, the policymakers, or the government regulators. So moving forward, we definitely need to get to an area where all 4 of their incentives are aligned, so that not only are we trying to do what's best for the insurance companies or the payers, who tend to have more lobbying dollars than anybody else, but also what is best for the actual end user, the recipient of the healthcare service, which is the patient, which is really where healthcare should be focused in the beginning, right? Like it's all about the patient. It should be anyway. So we need to make sure that our reimbursement models and where we go from here begins centering the patient in all of those decisions. Absolutely.
So when we're talking about providers and somebody's looking for a healthcare practitioner to work with them on their pain, what kind of advice can you give to them?
Sure. So especially if you've been experiencing pain for a significant amount of time, or if you've tried traditional I hate using traditional because it kind of sound what if you tried treatment before, and now you're kind of at your wit's end, you're still experiencing pain. The biggest thing to look for when you're looking for a clinician to help you treat your pain is to find somebody who is talking about this whole idea of neuroscience and pain perception, because that's really where a lot of these inroads are. That's where a lot of the research is now pointing for relief in chronic pain. So whether that's somebody like, he just wrote a book. It's called The Way Out. I think his name is Alon Siv. But he developed something called pain reprocessing therapy, or Adrian Lowe and his work on therapeutic neuroscience education. All of these treatment programs kind of center around the same thing, which is retraining the nervous system for safe movement. So when you're looking for a clinician, you want to shy away from somebody who tells you we're going to fix your posture and your muscles and make you pain free, because we already know that that's not necessarily the answer, especially if you've been experiencing pain for many, many years. You want to find somebody who's saying things like, we're going to build, put this structure around you to create a safe environment, and then we're going to kind of pull the scaffolding back as you would so that you can begin living your life pain-free. Words like self-management, biopsychosocial, all those little keywords, they should start, ringing little bells in your head and saying, okay, like this clinician gets it and gets what I'm going through, and probably has a process in place for helping people like me. And then that is probably the last point, is you want to find somebody who has experience treating patients who have been experiencing pain for a long time. Many clinicians and many, I'm from the outpatient occupational physical therapy world. They do a lot of work with, you have a knee surgery or you tweaked your back, let's get you in, let's fix. And that's really where like a biomedical framework can work. Let's get this muscle healed and you'll be back to normal. But for somebody who's been experiencing pain for many, many years, we know that that's not necessarily the case. And you want to find somebody who has that experience treating people with persistent musculoskeletal pain.
Typically in a program like that, are you also looking for a practitioner that partners with other experts like the psychologist and the psychiatrist and other people like that?
Yeah, it can work that way for sure. And I know at the clinic that we have here at Proactive, we do have some connections with some of the pain management physicians in the area that we trust, that we've done some work with. Sometimes it can even be like a chiropractor or something like that, because sometimes people are complex, right?
Right.
It is a biopsychosocial approach. And sometimes there is a muscle that needs to be stretched or tweaked, or sometimes there is an adaptation that you need to make in the way you're moving and your posture in order to kind of get things going right. So yeah, you want somebody that's got, whether it be a deep bench of people that we can refer to, so that you can get what you need from all the various disciplines. Because again, we try not to work in silos, or we shouldn't work in silos. You don't want to go to a physical therapist who's telling you it's your posture, and then you go to your primary care physician or your pain management doctor that says what you need is a pain medication. You want all of those clinicians that are working on your case, on your specific issue, to be on the same page. So we do spend a lot of time calling doctors, talking to their nurses, talking to the patients. I've done some 3-ways between doctors and even another physical therapist and the patient, just to make sure that everybody's kind of singing from the same song sheet when it comes to treating this patient and getting their function back, because that's what it's all about. It's not even about, turf wars and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's really about, it should be doing what is best for the patient. And sometimes that means that we make a referral out for somebody and they don't ever come back and see us again because they don't need us. And that's what I want for them. I don't want patients to be seeing me in a year. I want them to be living their life and playing with their grandkids in a year, right?
Absolutely. So is this program offered at the VA?
It should still be, yeah. I'm assuming so, that they still have interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary pain management programs there, especially because, the opioid epidemic hasn't gone away, and they're still trying to limit that prescription. I know some VAs that I've talked to in the past have instituted things like even music therapy and things like that for addressing, again, those non-physical factors of pain.
Yeah. So is this a program that can be done via telemedicine? If somebody is a long ways away from you, can they still do this program, or is it a program that's just in-house?
No, absolutely. So I personally love the move to telehealth because it kind of takes away, I come from the physical medicine world. It takes away the biggest crutch that clinicians like myself have had for years, which is you're in pain and we can use our hands to make you feel better, right? But relying on that sort of treatment, the manual therapy, the stretches, the manipulations, all of that kind of stuff, the mobilizations, all of the research shows that while those treatment techniques and treatment methods are good in the short term, they can be potentially damaging in the long term, because what you do is you instill in the patient this idea that I have pain, I need to go get an adjustment, or I have pain, I need a therapist to massage this or stretch this. And again, that's not necessarily the case, especially with persistent pain. So one of the great benefits of telehealth to me is that it removes that crutch, which means that clinicians have to rely on those higher level, really higher value services, which are facilitating self-management, which is just a fancy term for helping patients live the life that they need without pain, right?
Absolutely.
And that's so telehealth in particular can be very effective in that, because it removes this potential danger of becoming what we call, clinician dependent or something like that, where you build in the sense of dependency. So telehealth can definitely work for something like this. That's
awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Rehab U practice solutions that you have?
Sure, yeah. So Rehab U Practice Solutions is my consulting firm where I work with healthcare organizations, usually private practices and the like, to develop programs with them for their patients, whether it be, we do some of the marketing stuff, and then the other piece is like the clinical operations piece. And then I've got Proactive Rehabilitation and Wellness, which is the outpatient clinic that I own and operate here in Augusta, Georgia. So got my hand in a couple different things.
Awesome. And if our listeners are hearing this podcast right now and they're thinking either they themselves are in chronic pain and they need some help, or they have a friend or a loved one that could benefit from your services, how do they get in touch with you? How do they start this process?
Sure. The easiest way to find us is on our website, which is pro-activehealth.com. So pro-activehealth.com. And we've got all kinds of articles and videos there too about chronic pain and chronic pain management. And if nothing else, if you happen to be across the country from us, if nothing else, maybe it's a good resource body to have a discussion with a clinician in your local area.
And if they find a practitioner that's interested in working or learning more about this, they can also contact you from the Rehab U Practice Solutions, and you'll work with them to create a program like what you've created?
Sure, absolutely. You can find that at rehabupracticesolutions.com. That's rehab, the letter U, practicesolutions.com. In fact, we've actually got a book coming out at the tail end of this year called Better Outcomes, A Guide for Humanizing Healthcare, where we spent a good bit of that book, or I spent a good bit of that book, describing some of these pain management approaches, the biopsychosocial approach, and facilitating human relationships in healthcare and all of that.
That's fantastic. And, I think this is great for our listeners because many of them can be afraid to have these conversations with their practitioners. But I will tell you, as a practitioner, I love when people bring something to me that's new and exciting that I don't know about, and I want to learn more about it. And many practitioners will be open to learning about this and taking on new skill sets if you just open the door and invite them to learn more. So don't be afraid to share this information with your practitioner, even if they don't know anything about it, because you may be the key that opens the door for them to learn something new and offer it to people in your area.
Absolutely, yeah, and you need to think of healthcare as it's a two-way street, right? Like healthcare is not this hierarchical approach. You should not look at your clinician as like the God King sitting up on the throne telling you what you're going to do. It really is a situation. It's a human relationship which involves co-creation. So you and your clinician should be developing your treatment plan together as opposed to him or her telling you what you're going to do.
Yeah.
All the research shows that's going to be the way that works out the best anyway. So look for that co-creative spirit with the clinician.
Absolutely. Rafi, this has just been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us today and sharing this. I'm sure this is going to help a ton of people because we have a lot of chronic pain in this country and we need to learn a better way to deal with it. And people want their lives back. So This is a perfect way for them to do that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.